Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian Primer's Tropica Trade Group, and this is your end of day market recap for what is today, Monday the 20th. Sorry, I'm just getting rid of some of these things on my screen. Really another nice day for the markets, upside continuation. You had the Qs that led the way up 1.2%. S&P as well as small caps were no slouch for the day. The S&P was up about 0.75% for the day, and the small caps did just fine for the day, up 60 basis points. The breadth was very good once again. We're continuing to see. You can see on the bottom left of my screen that that's our measure for breadth. Basically minty green all day long, which is pretty strong. Pretty surprising in terms of at this point, like in November, the number of things that just continue, knock on wood, have been kind of positive. For example, there was a bond auction today, 20-year bond auction, and that actually showed some demand in there too. And TLT ended up going up a little bit more than 0.5% for the day, up over 1%. Remember, bonds actually started in the red today, so that's 1% gainer from the open. Blockchain stocks, cryptos, they did very well today. Again, I have this always sorted from percentage change from the open. Chinese internet names were very strong today. Those have been kind of, depending on what day you looked at those last week, some strength and then some give back. But, the leaders are leading in this group, right? So if you look at PDD, nice break higher here. This actually gave you a chance if you wanted to. It checked back quite neatly back into the top of the value area for the month of November. And this is the name that I'm in. I always will go into the name that's showing the strength, but that was amongst the outperformers. Here's what the whole group looks like. Again, I use the Chinese Internet ETF. That did not get over where it was the other day. I think that was Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, but still it's trying. And again, I think that there's some names that you can get involved in. By the way, the education names, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, look at the EDU making new highs. That's a name that we've talked about in the trading room a little bit, right? TAL did not have the close that I was looking for today. I was watching this name because, again, if you zoom out here and you look at some of these China education names, right? This name was a $90 stock. It's still down at $9. They really knocked that name down. But it's starting to kind of come out of that base, right? Here's TAL, here's EDU. Just interesting stocks to see these things come back. EDU is a $5 stock, right? It is now a $71 stock. So that's one hell of a comeback for that stock. And that's in the bucket of all the education stocks. I actually put together, let's see if I can bring this up. I actually put together, because there's nothing really out there in terms of education type software plays, right? We've seen a lot of strong names in this group, but there's really no way of kind of monitoring it that way, and it's too small for an ETF. I don't think there's enough companies, right? If there's only really like 5 to 7 companies or 10 companies, it's not enough to make an ETF. Like, they need more than that, and then you're really diluting names by trying to come up with names that may be somehow affiliated with education. But here's the breakout that we've seen, and really it's kind of accelerated on names like LRN and DUOL that have come out and just really had some great earnings. Both of those names we can kind of look at too, because considering I know a lot of people are looking at some of these names. Let me just get back to the daily chart. Again, nice little dip, right? So when you get a dip in these names, right? And I think this name, I forget the reason why it was down last week. Maybe it was a downgrade, but came right back into like the 5-period moving average and was kind of scooped up. LRN was something that we went over toward in the end of last week, just talking about how the value area is really slim. And you could see it's starting to kind of come back, up again. I mean, this name has been on a nice grinding run, but just a lot of continuation there, and a very strong group. Solar was also very strong today. Continuation, because that was the best performing group last week. That was up 10% last week. So continuation. and again, I think it's always kind of interesting, whenever there's a Barron's cover, there was a cover, not this weekend, but last weekend, talking about like the end for clean energy stocks. Now, again, it's always interesting, the timing, after the solar group has really gotten hit, been one of the worst performing groups, like now they choose to put that on their cover now. So that can be a contrarian buy signal. And I went through and I looked, and I actually traded First Solar today because I just thought it was a nice, easy setup on the break of the value area. Also, when you look at multiple time frames like we do at Tribeca Trade Group, it came into the weekly top of value, and it found its support and bounced on it quite nicely. Big bullish engulfing candle, right? So I'll keep an eye on this. I did not keep the position because I just don't need to be adding a solar name. I think, after the bounce that they've had last week, I also just don't have a lot of conviction in this group, right? You have to kind of measure which names you're going to take, not just on like straight ideas or what name is like popular on Twitter, but if you're going to put on a name, you do have to have some personal conviction in the name, right? And the solar names, I really haven't had too much conviction in. I haven't really traded them all year long, but I like the technical setup there in First Solar. But at the same point, these names, they could easily be up 5% one day, and then and then give it back the next day. So that's my view on those names. And I may try this again tomorrow versus this 155.83. The reason why I did take it off today is because it went into this version point of control, which is where I took the profit target. And I'm happy to put it back on, provided that price can get above this little overhead supply. That's also why I don't trade a lot of these names that have been beaten down, because you're just battling with overhead supply, right? Sellers are going to be looking to sell probably at every chance that they can once the stock goes up a little bit, right? That's why I just don't mess with names that are in downtrends. It's just too difficult with all the overhead supply. All right, but that was one of the top groups for the day. Also the communications, right? Sometimes you think communications and you're like, geez, what is that? Well, half of that ETF is Google and Meta, right? They moved those names over from XLK a few years ago from the tech ETF and moved them into the communications. Software continues to act very well. If you go through some of these, we talked about this probably about, at this point, it's been 2 weeks ago, about where the strength was in this market: tech, software, semis, right? And you got a new break above here. And if you go to this weekly chart, right, I think we're headed to this version point of control, which is at 384. That's only $5 away at this point. So very nice move here, right? And to round out, these other strong groups, the semiconductors ETF has been, let me just move this out of the way. This toolbar's in my way over here. There we go. Semiconductors break out to a new high. And, what's nice and clean about this, and, I've got indicators on my chart, so sometimes it's difficult to see the price action. It's just the way that I like them with value areas. But I mean, this is, to me, it's not a perfect cup and handle, but this is a really nice pattern here, a little bit of a move down and out to new highs. I mean, it's kind of what you want to see lead, when you've got, a very strong market. You want the semis, I think, right up there in terms of the leading indicator. Don't forget, we got this small company called NVDA that you may have heard of. They report earnings. I'm joking around. They report earnings tomorrow. Here's what they're, and by the way, like, this is what companies like to do. They like to run into these earnings reports. And, I always find it funny because everybody always wants to, I get it. Like, it's going to be a big earnings report tomorrow. It's an unknown. But if you held it today, right, without any of now there's always some unknown, but without the unknown of holding it to earnings, up another 2%, over $500. So I always like those trades where you can get it's the old expression, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? You don't know what we're going to get for earnings after the close. But hey, half the time these names will run into their earnings report, right? So that's a really nice move today. I was also impressed with this ARM, right, which saw some option activity, and it was a name that I looked at. I did not trade it today, but this is nice. I mean, look at this this level here, right, that we got above, and you don't even have to go back to this October highs where it couldn't break through. But even just this month, right, it had some difficulty with this, was it 56 level? Not so much today, and really a nice move. And again, this could also be just a run into NVIDIA's earnings, but there's your break of the value area at 55.86. And a huge day for this stock, up 6.7%. I've been holding Broadcom. Broadcom almost got to $1,000 today. I've mentioned in several of these end of day videos that I just really like the breakout of, multi-month, just like we went over with ARM, but a little bit that's more on the shorter uh, shorter time frame, because that's only going over this month and last month. But this Broadcom has been going sideways for about 3 months. More so, I think actually 4 months when you look back to this June, July. And yeah, I mean, so you got the break here, and I've been following the breakout. So I took another target in this today. It's been moving since I put this trade on. It's been moving the right way, and just love to see that out of the group. So I mentioned NVIDIA reports tomorrow. Here's their earnings history, right? It's a good earnings history. Last time it didn't do much. The previous 2 quarters, it really had huge numbers. But historically, and once you go back, once you forget about the last 2 quarters, it usually, this is what it normally does, right? There's been a couple negative quarters in there, a couple times where it goes up about 4%, 5%. There's another 4% in there. So, am I expecting like another $50 out of NVIDIA? I think that I think that they're going to continue to go higher. And I think a dip wouldn't be bad either, right? Because listen, I'm not going way long into NVIDIA earnings. So if it happens to continue to break out, you're working on a breakout to new highs here. Will I have a small piece of NVIDIA on? I probably will, and I do own it in the TTG trend portfolio, and I'll keep it there. Because if I think that it does pull back a little bit, I think that you're going to see buyers, unless it's really something significantly bad that they release in their earnings. But if it's not, if it's just managing what the street is looking for, the street's going to have some high expectations for the stock. So I think it's going to be an interesting report. Other names that I thought were really interesting. This is off of our weekend watch list. Palantir had a huge day, up 4%. Let's talk about where this stock could be going to. I mean, this is a real nice breakout. And again, you're seeing this over and over in so many charts. Even when you look at the S&P or NASDAQ, right? You had this big move on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the price action for the S&P and for the NASDAQ didn't really do much, right? Just kind of consolidated, let this 5-period moving average catch up a bit, right? And then resolving higher, right? And you'll see that over and over in strong charts, right? A move up, a little bit of couple day consolidation, and then, nice move on Friday, nice follow through. So where could this be headed towards? 2316 is a level to watch, and then also 2415, right? Those are the overhead supply virgin point of controls that I think that is the next place to see a little bit of a pause in the action. Also note, the last time that this hit this virgin point of control, right? So that's why I use these, right? This is not always the case that it happens this way, but it touched here and then sold off, right? That was the same thing with, Meta is another name that I'm watching this week, but that was the same thing in Meta a couple months back, right? We hit this perfectly and sold off. Now I was, I had, I was aware of that virgin point of control out there, and that's where I sold. But notice now we're now above that. It took a little while. It took a bit more than a month for it to kind of settle in here and move out. But I think Meta is one of the most solid charts out there. It's not extended, right? And it's also just very nicely just breaking out here. And the other thing to kind of think about too, now that you've got this breakout in Meta, is that if you're in it, great. But even if you get like a check back, right, you're checking back into previous support. So you'll get to the point where that you're seeing a lot of names that are getting extended right now, and it's not a bad thing at this point if there's some profit taking in some of these names, because I think that people are looking for dips at some point for some of these things. A couple other names that I wanted to go over. I went over the education names. Another name, I mentioned Broadcom, AVGO. Another name that you don't hear people talk about too much is Adobe, which we mentioned a couple times last week. I think this is headed towards that 624 VPOC, right? Just following the 5-period moving average up. I know this is not as exciting for some people like Palantir and DraftKings and so forth, but I tell you, these bigger names are doing quite well. Apple, sticking with the A's, right? We talked about last week how I thought this Virgin point of control looks like it's coming into play right around 192. Right. It seems like a lot of names are starting to get to their overhead supply levels for the names that haven't, broken out. So it kind of makes sense that we're getting to a place that we might see some sellers might to kind of, come in. ServiceNow, this was a name that we talked about on Friday. Super slim value area. Usually that means a decent move is coming. Nice follow through. And again, ServiceNow has been quietly one of the best stocks out there too, but same thing, had a little bit of consolidation after this gap up. Notice how it gapped above that Virgin point of control. It's one of the best things, in my opinion, that you could see, is just that when you're coming upon one of these Virgin point of controls and you gap up over it, that's pretty bullish. And you have this name almost coming out to new highs. Next level up I see is 683 that you can target for some overhead supply in ServiceNow. But again, that's still a decent ways away, and that would be coming very close to all-time highs in ServiceNow. So a couple other names that I thought were interesting for the day, and then we'll just quickly wrap up today's aftermarket call here is Celsius, right? This thing, there's several red bars after earnings. The earnings were not bad. Maybe they weren't as good as what the expectations were, but notice what happened here. We took out a downside Virgin point of control, right? So the overhead ones are supply, the ones down here demand, right? And it took it out, it bounced a little bit, still kind of took its time around here, right? And then buyers came in today. The stock was up 8% today. So really an impressive move, getting it back into its value area. Another name that sticking with the C's now, Carvana saw some calls today, which I thought were interesting. This is a name that I think is, it's kind of been going back and forth here a little bit. And, it had the earnings report was back here. It's not like, this chart is not like the others, right? It's more of a work in progress. But I keep seeing, I think there was last week we saw weekly calls in this too. We'll see. That was a decent position. Here, I'll show you what I saw on the tape. But right in here, right, there's 2,000 of these weekly calls that went up. And again, like usually when you see something like this, it's like a $50,000 trade. This was a $772 option premium. Normally that would be like against shares or something, but I didn't see it against shares. I thought that was an interesting trade. So perhaps a name to keep an eye on this week, because again, they're just going out to this week's calls in Carvana. So interesting. It will have to get through same thing over some overhead supply. It's right in the middle of the value area for the week with a little bit of resistance up there at 34.40. All right, guys, that is it for today. One other name that I'm watching for tomorrow, right? MELI had good numbers, not good numbers, but nice follow through. That's a name that we talked about last week. I'm long a little bit of this stock, right? It's a hard stock to trade because it's $1,480, but overall I think the trend looks great here too. So I am long some of this. And the name that I'm watching tomorrow, reports after the close tomorrow, is this DLO, right? It's kind of gotten forgotten about. Now, it did not break its value area today. unfortunately, because I started a position in this thing. And again, it's going to move on earnings. But I would watch, maybe after earnings, if it breaks out of that value area at 1922, right? A lot of international names are starting to kind of perk up a bit. So the weaker dollar helping a bit. All right, guys, that is it for today's video. Have a great night. By the way, we do have a Black Friday sale. We do have one of those. You could go to our website, tribecatradegroup.com. That pricing that you see on the website will be current through the end of the week, and you could use coupon code TTG new. And this will be our special for the year. And then we'll increase prices after that. So you could get that price for now that you see on the website, tribecatradegroup.com, and use coupon code TTG new. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.